Remember Keir Starmer's trip to Washington, where he all but fawned over Donald Trump as a way to get on his good side? Well, that was all for nothing, as the UK will still face the threat of global tariffs from the US. Experts warned that Trump's 25% levy on car imports alone could put 25,000 UK jobs at risk. The president signalled the punitive 25% tariff on all cars imported to the US last week as part of the build up to a historic statement in the White House Rose Garden on Wednesday. But don't worry, Starmer has a genius idea, and that is to give into the US as he plans to slash taxes for US corporations. The big US technology companies have been offered a significant tax cut by Keir Starmer in return for lower tariffs from Donald Trump's administration as the UK braces itself for a global trade war. Now, at a time when the government is slashing benefits for disabled people, they are now cutting taxes for US corporations. But people on welfare aren't the only ones losing out. The taxes will now be shifted to small businesses. Downing Street sources confirms the UK had reached broad agreement with US counterparts on a trade deal focusing on technology, which it hopes will help the UK secure a carve-out from tariffs. Talks between officials will continue. The UK's trade deal offer is understood to include a proposal to broaden the DST, which is a digital service tax, to bring smaller companies within scope, meaning they will contribute to a tax take which is forecast to increase to 1.2 billion a year by the end of the decade. The so-called Party of Business is throwing smaller companies under the bus to give larger ones a tax break in order to appease Donald Trump. Kevin, am I being too harsh here? Now, obviously, I think, cutting taxes for corporations is wrong, something I'll never agree with, but has Keir Starmer been put in a difficult situation in which he's forced to capitulate, or is he weak? Many European nations, they said they are fighting back with their own tariffs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, of course, he has been put in a difficult situation, but then again, so is every other world leader.
True.
And as we keep being told by Labour, it's a matter of tough decisions. Some world leaders have decided to make tough decisions in order to stand up for their nation, in order to
Yep.
fight, and actually maybe show some level of backbone and spine. Keir Starmer has taken, dare I say, the Neville Chamberlain approach of just appease, and hope that the bad guy gives in the end, which has never worked and never will work. If anyone understands the psychology of a bully, this is how it inevitably is going to work out. He has decided to, again, allow the broadest shoulders to be unburdened onto the narrower shoulders. In this case, slightly less ridiculously than disabled people having to pay for military spending increases, and this time it's smaller businesses, which, like as you pointed out, employ a lot of people, having to pay an increased amount of tax so that Elon Musk, let's be honest, that's exactly who is behind this, the man who purchased, for all intents and purposes, the US federal government, can have a slightly lower tax rate, which already, can we just point out, is 2%, which is a joke to begin with. Vastly increased from where that was in the first place, let alone decreasing it. And can we just take a second also to point out that Elon Musk, again, an absolutely masterful gambit, spent £26 million to lose an election in Wisconsin. Beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
It's super big brain genius boy hours, as always. Keir Starmer is a genuinely weak and pathetic man. He has no plan for anything, and you can see that in virtually any brief. Take your pick of government departments. They're flying by the seat of their pants, inventing policies on the fly. And this is no different, really. And he's decided to just capitulate in the face of pressure rather than standing up for himself, as some other leaders have decided to do.
Yeah. I mean, look, you are right. It's and I'm glad you pointed that out. He's been put in a difficult situation, but the entire European Union and globally, people have been put in the same position.
But these are global tariffs, some of them. So literally every world leader has been placed in this situation where you've got essentially a kind of mad toddler who's just sort of handing out random numbers. 50% tariff on this, 20% tariff on that. It's just insanity.
I feel like, though, that he doesn't know where the UK is trying to pitch itself. He obviously wants a really special relationship with the US. They clearly have a difference of opinion when it comes to Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
And now when it comes to tariffs, our European counterparts are probably going to be thinking the UK needs to side more of us. I would rather that, because as much as I think there are problems across Europe, as much as the issues to have with the EU, a bloc that has far better environmental and food protections, a bloc that does actually try and do something about global tax avoidance, versus a state which is rapidly becoming a fascist state, a techno-feudal state, which we spoke about before the show. I know where I want to put my side on. Yeah. It's really strange with Keir Starmer, because he's someone I would say his political instincts is to side more with the EU, but his love for power, or his respect for bigger power, clearly lies in with the US. I don't know if you can probably enlighten me, but where does that put us? We're kind of sort of 1 foot in one area and 1 foot in the other area.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, the old certainties pre-Brexit are gone, and indeed the old certainties pre-Trump's second term are gone. But the Atlanticists don't want to accept this. The Atlanticists being the kind of trilateral commission, special relationship, Britain being the little poodle of America type foreign policy position. They're fantasists at this point, pretending that the world is exactly as it was 6 months ago, when we could just go along to get along and knuckle under, and America would just be nice to us this time, honest. That world doesn't exist anymore. And most people have accepted that, up to and including the wet blankets of the Liberal Democrats have accepted that.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
That's a good point.
Even Ed Davey has stood up and said, we need to distance ourselves from America because America has distanced itself from us. It's a ridiculous situation. It's untenable to suggest that the Tony Blair, George W. Bush-esque relationship can possibly exist anymore. That world has gone. And so to try and either resurrect it or just pretend, just literally just whole cloth pretend that reality exists, is to the detriment of the British public and ultimately to his own party and electoral chances, as we're seeing, because the playing the blinder over Ukraine bump has gone now. I saw a poll today that had them in third place, below the Tory party, who are literally about as popular as brain cancer. It's ridiculous.
That's interesting that they're above Labour, because the Tory party are being all but forgotten, you know?
Well, I do a regular joke about Kemi Badenoch, just asking who is she, because literally no one knows. She's an absolute non-entity. She will not fight the next general election unless it happens very quickly.
A non-entity is far more popular. Far more popular, probably overstretching it. It's more
far less unpopular.
Far less unpopular than the I was going to say Conservative Party, which I wouldn't have been incorrect actually. The Red Conservative Party, i.e., Labour. Yeah. But I want to ask you kind of a wider thing here, right? This is the type of economy which is essentially held to ransom by corporations and imperialist nations. Even if the tax cuts on tech giants is the most risk-averse policy, why should we be doing this? I mean, trade is good. Trade is actually essential. But when it comes to massive tech giants, who I think are too big to be allowed to exist as a private company, surely we should be looking at some sort of nationalized tech companies, even social media. I mean, this current model cannot go on, can it?
Well, exactly. Well, this is the thing. I mean, I would posit that we should have far more. In fact, the vast majority of the economy should be nationalised. But in lieu of that, let's go with the fact that we live in a capitalist world and be realistic for the time being. These are trusts. These are absolutely monopolies or virtual monopolies. Basically, they are cartels.
Yeah.
And in order for any realistic capitalism to continue along into the future, you have to break these companies up. This is a thing that people knew back in the late 19th, early 20th century, that you have to have antitrust laws. You have to have protections in place, because unfettered capitalism leads to something of a ringing statement here on the channel, techno-feudalism, right? This is where it inevitably ends up. You've got Elon Musk buying the federal government in the United States, trying to openly buy seats on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, although again posting a massive L. You've got Tony Blair and his institute, and Palantir and BlackRock and all of this meddling in Britain. This is where it's inevitably going to end up if you don't have any of those protections. And they've essentially, you say that the economy is being held to ransom by these corporations. I'd go beyond that and say it's owned whole cloth by those organizations right now. This is not democracy under attack. This is essentially a technocracy that we need to fight and defeat in order to get our democracy back.
No, that's a really good point, because I suppose you can't be held to ransom when they own everything. This is
Yeah.
just how it's sort of ended up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing is, though, I always like to say this. I say, as a socialist, right, you should actually listen to us when it comes to capitalism, because even though I'm not a defender of capitalism, if you are a capitalist and you like the system, you probably should listen to us, because even though I think this is the natural endpoint to capitalism, I know a lot of libertarians like to say it's not really capitalism, it's corporatism. It's the same thing. But if you want to protect genuine markets, if there is such a thing, if you want to have a genuine participatory capitalist system, you're going to have stronger regulation. You're going to have to pull out things that shouldn't be in the market, i.e. monopoly companies or monopoly services, even housing, health, all those sorts of things. Take that out of the market, and you can still have a vibrant, market when it comes to just things like, I don't know, buying TVs and sofas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You should probably listen to us, because we're not being listened to, and we're listening to the neoliberals. This is where we've ended up. It's not just that, oh, look, a social media popped up because of capitalism. We have a social media company which is dominating globally, and it's infecting not just our politics, but global politics too. And this is a real problem of democracy.
Yeah.
And if we don't know anything about it, it is going to be full-on techno-feudalism and barbarism.
Well, indeed, yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. They should listen to socialists. And again, being a socialist in the UK just means being correct 3 years ahead of where liberals realised that you were correct. But even if you don't want to listen to socialists, if you're a capitalist, listen to the great granddaddy, the big kahuna of capitalism, Adam Smith, who you would despise and call a communist now. Even though
he would be considered far left today.
Absolutely, yeah. He hated the rentier class. Yeah. He said that the landlords were basically scum, which is absolutely true. He said there should be strong regulation and high levels of taxation in order to stop the accrual of absolute wealth in the hands of a very small minority of people. Because he was one of the originators of capitalism, and he understood that was an advancement on feudalism only if you stopped it from going back and into being feudalism. If you just allow it to recess back into the thing it was originally, which is essentially what we're kind of beginning to see now, it's no good in the first place.
Well, he understood, because obviously he was of the era when we saw feudalism, right? And he was part of the experimentation to move us beyond that, right? He could see that. And it's funny. I mean, look, yesterday, even the Adam Smith Institute, which, by the way, is a complete bastardization of Adam Smith's politics.
Yeah, a libertarian joke. Yeah.
It's just a libertarian joke. It should just remove the name. And they made an April Fool's joke, a picture of Gary Stevenson saying, this is one of our new honoured people, whatever they call it. And I was thinking, like, yeah, you find that funny, right? But Adam Smith would have far more in common with Gary Stevenson than you would. He would be supporting wealth taxes. And also, Helena shared this amazing post of a conservative voter in the 1960s. You've probably seen it. And it was a newspaper clipping. And this man said, I voted conservative in 1962, and I supported a strong social democratic economy where basically there are extremely high taxes on the rich, because it basically protected entrepreneurialism rather than having a grossly unequal society where the rich just started buying everything and renting it back to us. He then said, in today's standards, I'd be considered really, really left-wing, but my politics hasn't changed.
Virtually every conservative leader, from basically, I suppose, Winston Churchill to even 1979 Margaret Thatcher. If you actually go back and read the manifesto of the 79 Conservative Party, nothing was said about privatisation. They did say they would halt the nationalisation of further industry, but they absolutely supported the keeping of all of the then nationalised industries as nationalised, which would be seen as rank communism, and she'd be smeared as an anti-Semite within 5 minutes, I'm sure, just like Gary Stevens has, because that's their new tactic. It worked once, maybe it'll work again, and everyone in between that would be considered, some sort of out there crazy lefty student politics, not adult in the room maniac. When actually it was just mainstream politics during Britain's most prosperous. And when I say prosperous, I mean for the majority of people. Obviously, you can go back to feudalism when lots and lots of wealth was very much at the top. But the genuinely prosperous for the majority of people, the most prosperous period was when we had higher taxes on the rich, and we had a Conservative Party who weren't crazy, delusional Chicago boy freaks.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.